Okay, hello and welcome to Sales Chats. This is a 30-minute single subject rapid fire chat with the sales expert. And this is brought to you by Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP magazine. My name is John Golden. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here with Pipeliner CRM and also Managing Executive Editor of SalesPOP magazine. I'm here in San Diego, and I'm joined by my colleague Martha in Vienna, who's the empress of all things social media. So how's everything good in Vienna today, Martha?
Everything fine.
Good, good. Martha's just telling me that they've got their first day of spring, I think, in Vienna. So that's nice because it can get pretty cold. So our guest today is joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, and this is Mike Kunkle. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Mike's a well-known consultant, strategist, speaker, writer on sales transformation. He's spent over 2 decades helping companies analyze sales performance levers and improve sales productivity and results. And today we're going to talk to Mike about sales management enablement, right? So everybody's heard of sales enablement, Mike, but sales management enablement, what's that all about?
It's a little scary that we have to ask that question, and not that you're asking it because it's a great tee up, but it worries me sometimes that we're so focused on the sales aspects and not on sales manager enablement. So I just think of it, John, as the act of selecting, training, coaching, preparing, and supporting your frontline sales managers to actually manage their sales teams to either more effectively serve their buyers as they move through the buying process to higher win rates, and obviously in achieving their sales objectives. So that's the crux of it for me.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a moment, because as you said, a lot of focus is put on sales enablement, and we're always giving tools to salespeople, or we're putting salespeople to training, or we're introducing methodologies to salespeople. And yet with sales managers, we kind of often just promote salespeople into sales management positions. We don't train them. And then we have that horrendous statistic that most sales managers last a year and a half in the job. And it's right. Not no surprise, because we basically deep end them with no life jacket.
Well, that's exactly right. So I was a salesperson, back when I was thin and had hair. I outsold I outsold 5 people in the office, and what was the first thing they did? They promoted me to be the manager. Now, if I hadn't been a manager before and gotten into corporate America to sort of start over and do that, I would have been in big trouble. But I had managed for a small company owner who pretty much put me under his wing, and it made all the difference in the world that I was prepared. Now, the company that I worked for, great company, lots of training, but nothing specifically aimed at that time for the branch sales managers. And so once I got into training, that was one of the very first focuses as part of a focus group and a task force that built an 18-month prepare prior to promotion type of training for managers. And so we sometimes hired from the outside, but most often we were promoting top salespeople, and we wanted to make sure that they got prepared before they got in to their first sales management role. And that program was a huge success, and I'm surprised that many years later, I don't see more of that happening.
Yeah, so why is that? So why do we think that we don't have to prepare sales managers in the way that we prepare salespeople? And why do we think that salespeople, that we should give them lots of tools and tactics and training, but we shouldn't give them to sales manager? Why is that? Because it seems so counterintuitive in many ways.
I think that's the $64,000 question, John. I personally don't get it. I think possibly the reason is that they're taking their best people, they're putting them into a management role, and they think sometimes, well, they've been there and done that, they ought to be able to help these other people do that. But as a frontline salesperson, I think it also surprises me that more don't do better, because I actually see a lot of parallels. And I know there are differences, right? The analytics and leadership and those sorts of things. But if you are, as a frontline salesperson, truly selling in a consultative fashion, you are leading with questions. You are curious. You are applying solutions to problems that you have deeply understood before you start bringing in product and solution. Coaching is very much like that. And so I'm always a little puzzled of why we take top salespeople who should be consultative and using discovery and asking questions and really matching solutions to the needs, why they don't apply those same sets of skills with their reps when they become managers. But I don't think it's intuitive, because you get into these pressure cooker situations as a manager. You've now got new responsibilities, and you've got to report up, you've got forecasting, you've got analytics, you've got you've got customers that you've got to try to solve problems for. You've got this much larger role, and now you're responsible for driving results through others. And so if you don't address those things, I think it's a huge gap.
Yeah, I always think one of the things that we used to talk about a lot at Hathwaite when I was there, when we were doing sales consultancy, was there's a lot of very successful salespeople, but they're what we call unconsciously competent, right? So they don't really know what makes them successful, or they can't really describe it, and they can't transfer it, right? Because it's so innate to them. And I think that's part of the problem when you do promote like successful salespeople into a sales management position and you expect them to be successful. You don't realize that they don't actually really know or can translate what makes them successful to other people. So that gets back to your original point of actually training and enabling sales managers to be successful. So what would be one of the first steps you would take when you start looking at enabling a sales manager? Say brand newly minted sales manager, fresh on the job. What are some of the first things that you would do?
Well, if let's assume for a second in our example that I'm walking into an organization where there is no type of preparation for managers. Then I would step back and I would look at what the top producers are doing in that role today. And obviously there are best practices that span industries in terms of leadership. But I would do a top producer analysis of the most effective sales managers in that business, and I would start to build a curriculum, right? And I would build that curriculum around what they need to be doing on a daily basis based on their workflow. And that would include things like how are they going to hire and select more effectively for members of their team? How are they going to use reporting and analytics to understand how their team is performing, but more importantly, where there might be gaps in their performance that are causing a shortfall either in results or a conversion ratio between stages of a sales process? How do you look at those things and form a hypothesis about where might these reps or my team be falling short? And then how do I use the best practices in our organization or that I know personally to coach them and close that gap? And how do I coach them effectively, engaging them, getting them involved, having them own the solutions, and then monitor their action plan to ensure that they're moving toward closing those gaps and using the skills. And then there's the whole concept of field training and coaching.
Sure.
Right, so that I can do those things more effectively. So if you look at the spectrum of what makes a sales manager successful, I kind of have what I call a sales management system. And so I'll see if I can do this on screen. I don't know how well this will work, right? But this is the system that I've been created and I've been talking about, and where you really start with teaching the managers first, how do they hire most effectively? And then step back and say, as an organization, how do we take responsibility and remove the barriers to these frontline sales managers being successful? And when I say that, John, I'm talking about a study I did, for example, for a company who came to me and they said, hey, Mike, we'd like our managers to coach more, and we're concerned that they're not. I said, well, how do you know that? Well, we did a 360, and all of our reps are saying they're not coaching. And I said, well, why is that? Well, we don't know. I mean, this is what we want you to figure out. So I talked to the managers, and we do some focus groups, and I find out that managers are being asked to do so many things that it's impossible for them to actually coach. And out of all the things they're being asked to do, the ones that get them in trouble if they don't do them, the ones that they get the phone to ring or an email or somebody talking to them, have nothing to do with coaching. And when we did a little time and motion study, John, it was the sales managers were being asked to do, by conservative estimate, 110 hours worth of stuff per week.
Wow.
Obviously, they weren't all doing that. And out of all that stuff, none of it was really coaching the performance of their team. So the company made a great decision, and they started to remove barriers to the managers actually doing their job.
Yeah,
So,
that's a really interesting point that you bring. Well, there's about 5 or 10 interesting points in what you just said, but focusing in on one for a moment, just like you said, is the expectation level of what a sales manager should do, right? And let's face it, coaching is not something that comes natural to a lot of people, because people still today don't really understand the difference between coaching and managing, or coaching and telling, or coaching, telling, and yelling, whichever combination. And yet again, coaching is something that requires time and space. And I just saw in your document you had the management operating rhythm, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that's really critical, is building in the time and space to do these things, but also doing them consistently. Because if I say to you, hey, Mike, we're going to have a coaching session once a week, and put that on your calendar, and then I cancel it like 9 times out of 10 because something more important comes up, what does that tell you about coaching?
Well, it's not important at all, right?
Right. So how do you help establish a management operating rhythm?
So what I've done in the past, and I'm going to give a nod to Cloud Coaching International for Walter Rogers' book Pathways to Growth. In that, they've identified 9 different what they call disciplines, and I've used 6 of them before myself, and some of those are in my operating rhythm. But if you step back and say, what do the managers need to do to be successful? They need to be able to forecast, obviously, right? And they need to be able to roll up that forecast. And to do that, their reps need to be able to really qualify effectively. So what's around all of that, and how do you do great forecasting? Then if you're going to be successful in sales, you have to be able to identify leads and possible opportunities and convert them into opportunities in your pipeline. So how can you help your team do that? How do you help them manage those opportunities through the pipeline, conduct effective pipeline management sessions, either as a team or with individuals? How do you do account management? So once you've got an account and you decide what the objectives are, after you acquire it, you've either got growth, retention, reactivation, or you retire it someday. What's the objective for that account, and how will you achieve that? And then how do you lead your team with your team meetings, with motivation, with sharing best practices with each other? And how do you make the time to do these one-on-one coaching sessions, where in those you might be talking about some tactical things like pipeline or territory or strategy, but you're also taking time to use the reporting again to know where to ask questions, where to have a dialogue, and then where to observe. This is a huge gap that I see, John, that managers will often say, hey, Bob, I want to ride along with you, or
Right.
we need to spend some time together. And then they go see whatever Bob wants them to see, or they see something by happenstance, rather than me saying, hey, I noticed when I compared your conversion ratios in the last 3 months to the teams, you were struggling more between stage 2 and stage 3.
Right.
And those rates. So I'd like to work with you and see you in some stage 2 opportunities, and let's see what you're doing there to move things forward, how you're meeting the buying process exit criteria, determining what that is, what methodologies you're using, how well you're doing them. Let's dig into that. So set some appointments with me to go see some meetings in stage 2. Now, wouldn't that be drastically different than what most managers do? Just kind of show up somewhere, right?
Yeah, no, it would be, and I think a lot of times it even is worse in that the manager says, "Let me ride along," and then suddenly they take over, and or the salesperson thinks, "Oh, my manager's in the room, I'm going to let them lead the call," or whatever, instead of the manager saying, "No, I'm here just as purely as an observer." But yeah, I agree totally with you, and I think you've touched on another really fascinating point, and one that we at Pipeliner took on board very seriously, is being able to provide analytics to see where both teams and individuals have areas of deficiency. And that's why we created the archive feature in Pipeliner. But just like you said, is unless you can really analyze and look at the data and see a particular salesperson's performance, unless you can spend time looking at that, you're not going to spot those nuances about maybe it's during the proposal stage that they have problems, or maybe it's in the qualification. Maybe they're great once it gets past qualification, but they're not so hot there. But being able to focus in on that. So how important do you think technology and being able to use technology to analyze sales rep performance is critical to the modern sales manager?
Oh, I mean, it's becoming the ticket to entry, I think, because you waste so much time. You become so efficient if you're trying to do that stuff in other ways. The technology, somebody years ago said to me, before the term sales enablement or enablement even came into our place, said to me, Mike, technology is just an enabler. Right, and that stuck with me for years. Right, and if you can use the technology to enable decisions from a management perspective, and I know at Pipeliner you show a lot of things visually, which allows people to grasp them more clearly and quickly. So if I can look at a dashboard that compares the last 3 months, for example, of my pipeline conversion ratios to people in our organization who have been identified as top producers, and then people in the middle, and then my own sales team, and then my one sales rep, I can look straight up those conversion ratios in every stage and say, I can help Bob the most in the proposal stage, or I can help Bob the most between solution and close, or whatever it might be in their company. If you can see that quickly, you can focus your efforts and time rather than sitting down with an Excel spreadsheet trying to figure things out on your own. So I think it's huge. And I think if you want to go to another one of sales management's roles, the reason that so much sales training fails, as you would well know, right, with your background, John, because there's no sustainment for the knowledge, and people can't do what they can't remember. There's no planned transfer, because even if they remember it, doesn't mean they're going to use it in the real world. And even if they use it, doesn't mean they're going to do it well. In fact, if they don't, they're more likely to stop using it because it created pain. So you need someone to coach them to mastery. And the key people in the organization who can play that role and radically transform a sales team, well, it's the frontline sales manager. Yeah. So there is a tie to so much relative to performance, and technology can enable many of those things as well. Imagine if you're able to know from your team receiving questions, through technology and answering them, who remembers what and who doesn't. Then you can laser focus on, hey, I need to go help John with XYZ, as opposed to, hey, what's going on in your world, John? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, another key point here is that you're absolutely correct. I've believed and believe forever is that the sales manager is the biggest revenue multiplier you have in an organization, because if your sales manager is on top of their game, then your salespeople are going to be on top of their game, and you're going to get exponential increases in performance. But on the other side, just like you said, is in order for salespeople to be effective, they have to follow the sales process. They have to do things at the right moments. They have to have some consistency, uniformity, and that has to be embedded in their daily work practice. And the only way you're going to do that nowadays is through technology. So it is that great combination, because if I'm, as a sales manager, using the technology like the way you just suggested it, to do proper performance reviews, to be able to take, like, for instance, from our software, being able to take the performance insights and do what you're talking about here, compare my performance against top performance against team, then you have a fantastic winning combination. So here's my question. How do you get sales managers focused on that and away from where they tend to naturally gravitate towards, and that's the end of the pipeline, parachuting in to help be the super closer?
Yeah, I only know two ways to do that. One is you absolutely must have top-down support to refocus the sales managers on a proven effective system, implementing, for example, that management operating rhythm that we talked about. And their sales leaders asking them the questions and following up and coaching on them to help them change their behaviors. The other way is sort of a grassroots way, and it's a little bit riskier, but I have seen it work, where you look across, let's say as a sales enablement leader, I might look across my frontline sales managers and say, who is the most bought in to coaching and the results that it can get? What if I work with that individual, really help him or her implement an effective system, watch the results that it gets pre and post, and then try to use that to swim upstream in the organization to get more adoption? All right, so you can bubble it up like that. I've seen that work, but I've also seen that help one particular manager, but really be a waste of time for the organization. If you can get the top-down support, if you can help people understand the incredible potential gains of doing frontline sales management well and focused on key things that drive performance, that's really the way to go.
So what other advice do you have? Because I can hear some folks out there listening today going, John, Mike, Martha, this all sounds fantastic, but we're struggling to make our numbers, and I don't have the time for all of this stuff. I'm trying to help close deals. I'm trying to hang on to customers. As you mentioned earlier, I've got 150 hours worth of stuff to do every week. This sounds great and sounds lovely and theoretical, but I don't have the time to do it. So how do you get somebody over that hump, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is, that again, right, the other $64,000 question. I think some of it is removing the barriers, getting senior sales leadership to give them the time and focus. If you can get a basic management operating rhythm put in place and get people into a cadence, it will help with that. If you use data in reports and things that are available today to show them, if you operate as a super seller, right, you eventually hit the wall because there's a limit to your time. If you can replicate yourself, here's what other companies who have done that in a best practice category have been able to accomplish. The only things, they're the thing, I mean, the same way that we sell anything, right? What's the current state? What are the pains? What's the desired future state? What are the benefits and outcomes? And trying to make both an emotional argument and an emotional appeal and a logical argument to help people know, how to move forward more effectively. So again, though, if you can find that one frontline manager who will go with you and try the system and succeed, that goes a long way in the organization. Or again, top-down support is to, here's how we're now going to run our business.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, because there's nothing that catches people that's attention like success, right? And that is the one great thing about sales, is that if they see something working somewhere else, they're going to follow and copy that immediately. So I really like that idea of finding somebody and really championing them. Easy for me to say.
Well, you turn them into a champion, right? I mean, it's like what we try to do with buyers in our own deals, right? If you can find somebody internally who will really be your, a coach or an influencer, or at best a champion, then you capitalize on that relationship and you work it. And we can use that same concept internally when we're trying to drive change in our organizations.
And the idea of the super seller, your sales manager becoming the super seller, I mean, I have no scientific research based on this, but I bet you if you did a study, you would find that there's a correlation between the sales managers, a super seller, and actually decreased in performance of some of their salespeople. Because let's face it, it gets pretty demotivating if your sales manager keeps like parachuting in and taking over the deals and everything. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, I've seen this, and I've seen this happen in reality, like anecdotally and etc. So I think there is a point where the super closer, super seller, sales manager actually starts to have a negative impact, as opposed to, people thinking, well, it's additive. I'd say it's actually subtractive in the end.
So that's a good thought, John. So there are ways to raise that. And if I think back to my own example about the 110 hours, that company approached me because they had done a 360-degree survey. And what they wanted as a solution was all wrong, but they were right to have done the survey, and it pointed out that not much coaching was occurring, and there was a disengagement or disenfranchisement amongst their sales teams based on how their managers were working with them. So using 360s like that or doing engagement surveys, they can be ways to surface that and maybe create enough of a pain point in the organization for people to want to change.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, let's look at it, I mean, logically, right? If you might come to me and say, John, you know, you're a great salesperson and I'm going to invest the time now on coaching you and helping you, you know, even improve more, make more money. That's motivating to me, right? Because you're taking a personal interest in me. As opposed to if you come to me and say, where's your deals? Let me look at your deals. Okay, listen, get me on the phone with that guy. I think I can get this closed. What are you saying to me on the in the former example? You're saying you're a great guy and I think you've got potential and I'm going to help you realize that potential. In the second and the latter one, you're saying, I don't think you're that good. You're certainly not as good as me, so I'm going to take over. So I think we've got to go somewhere to kind of you know, helping people understand the messages that they're sending through their actions.
That's exactly right. So, you know, we talk a lot about, and I'm not a proponent of sales being a bad word, right? It bugs me. It bugs me in the market today and in the profession today that, you know, we're afraid to say we sell or we don't want to use that phrase. I do, however, have always thought that great sales is service. And Larry Levine wrote a post recently about servant leadership applied to sales. And I wonder sometimes, because I loved that concept when I first read about it years ago, where's the approach towards servant leadership? Managers should be servant leaders. They serve really a couple of key stakeholders, right? Their managers, customers, obviously in the organization, and their sales reps. And if you put yourself in that mindset, the way you approach your job becomes radically different. It becomes being a problem solver for your customers and helping your reps become problem solvers for customers, and you become a problem solver for your reps. Now, you might not just say, hey, John, so what kind of problems have you got? Because right, that doesn't work any more than when we ask that to customers.
And that's a big long list on my part. So you know, we don't want to go there.
Okay, all right, we won't do that today. But so that doesn't work, right? But that's where that whole diagnostic element comes back in. You know, and I can start to have a real authentic conversation from a helping perspective about, hey, John, I noticed that in between you know, proposal and negotiation, your conversion ratios are X as opposed to this 2X number that I'm seeing generally from people. I'd like to dig into that with you and help you figure out what's happening in that stage for you, what you might be able to do differently based on what some of our other top producers do, and how we can lift that result for you. What a different approach and attitude, and also me being the leader, being able to come and have that conversation, targeting it somewhere where I might actually be able to help. I think for me, that's a very different approach, and it opens the door to sales developmental coaching as opposed to tactical coaching, which is what so many managers do.
Yeah, I love what you just pointed out there, because you can see that, number one, it's targeted, it's surgical, it's specific, and it's something that the salesperson can immediately measure the success rate of and see the benefit for them, as opposed to, as you say, just coming and saying, I'm going to coach you.
Right.
I'm going to make you a better salesperson. And you're like, great. What does that exactly mean? So I'm not a good salesperson right now. But if you come in surgically and clinically, like you say, and focus in on areas that I can go, wow, actually looking at that, I can see the benefits to myself if I can fix this. I mean, you know, ultimately, I'm going to sell more, make more money, be happier. It's all good.
Well, yeah, we talk about creating a partnership when we sell. I wrote a program years ago called Partnership Selling for a company, and it was all about trying to get on the same side of the table as your buyer as a partner and have them feel that. And we could just, again, I see so many parallels between great consultative professional selling and great consultative professional leadership in sales, right? Where you can do that same thing, get on the same side of the table as a partner with your rep and work together to solve problems. I mean, the loyalty alone, the feelings that creates, and you know, we try always, right? I'm kind of an analytic and, you know, a diagnostics guy, right? I'm very logically focused. but people still buy based on emotion, and people make life decisions based on emotion. And we hire their skills, but the whole person shows up at work. So when you can take that into consideration, and you can start to manage and lead in ways that are authentic and truly are servant leadership based on helping people, you create a ton of loyalty, engagement. You'll have a higher performing team. You'll have a happier team, right? So it's not just always the clinical and diagnostic type of things, but there's a lot of leadership involved here too. And again, things that can be learned, some things that are more inherent, but also something that we should be considering in our sales management development curricula.
Yeah, absolutely. And not surprisingly, our 30 minutes has flown, and it's packed full of great insights. So let's sit on your side of the table for a moment, Mike, and you tell us, what do you do every day to set yourself up for success? What's the Mike Kunkle secret to daily success?
I am a hardcore prioritizer, and I have time blocked on my calendar at the end of every day, in the beginning of the next day. And I usually block other times on my calendar because I find that if I don't, the things that we talk about in meetings never actually get done anywhere,
right,
because you don't have time. So in those moments, though, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, I am reflecting back on what happened. I'm looking at action plans and follow-up items for the next day. I'm planning how and when those things are going to get done. And when I kick off in the morning with my acai smoothie and coffee, I'm looking at those things and figuring out, has anything changed? Has anything else come up in emails? What is my plan? And then executing. And I try to apply the 80-20 rule as much as I can. What's the 20% of stuff I can do that's going to get 80% of my results? And that's very simple for me, but that's what's worked for me for many years.
Excellent, thank you. So again, I'd like to thank you, Mike. So before we go, though, how can people contact you?
Oh, probably best through either LinkedIn, where after the /in, it's just Mike Kunkle, all one word, or at mikekunkle.com, or I'm probably going to regret this one, but Mike at mikekunkle.com. You can email me that way. Probably the best ways to get in touch.
Great. Well, again, thanks a lot, Mike, for being with us today. As I said, the 30 minutes really flew, and we could have probably gone into each segment and given them their own sales chat. So that's fantastic. So again, this was sales chats brought to you by Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP magazine. So go online, check out salespop.pipelinersales.com. Get all the latest on what's happening in the sales world. Lots of contributors. Mike's a contributor there as well. Thanks, Martha, for keeping everything running smoothly as usual there in Vienna. So good evening to you there in Vienna. Good, whatever it is, midday to you in Boston right now. And this mid-morning here in San Diego. So we'll see you all again for another sales chat really soon. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.